In late May of 1967, on the gravel turnaround outside the Pawnee County Cooperative Extension Office in Larned Bend, Kansas, Garrison Threlkeld stepped out of a clean white state-issued sedan with a green-painted Langstroth Hive demonstration frame in his right hand and a clipboard in his left, and he walked toward the open doorway of his office with the brisk gait of a man who had a 1:30 demonstration to give. He was 38 years old, the extension agent for Pawnee and the 2 counties west of it. 3 years out of a degree in apiculture from a state university 240 miles east of where he was standing, and he had spent the previous 9 months trying to convert every one of the 71 small acreage beekeepers in Pawnee County off their inherited woven straw bee skeps and onto Langstroth wooden movable frame hives. At 1:30 sharp, the men came in. 43 of them. Pickups parked 3 deep along the gravel turnaround. The Extension Service had laid on a free demonstration hive, a free smoker, free sheet metal queen excluders, and a printed 16-page guide on commercial Langstroth management that the Department of Agriculture had been mailing out since 1962. Garrison Threlkeld stood at the front of the meeting room with the green frame held up against the wall, and he gave the talk for an hour and 20 minutes. It was, by the standards of the Extension Service in the spring of 1967, a sound talk. The grandson telling you this story is a 29-year-old man named Tucker Stannard, who grew up in Wichita and came back to the farm on County Road 11 in March of 2024 because his grandfather had asked him to. The grandfather was 96 years old by then. The grandson did not know the first thing about bees. He learned by reading a 1903 black-bound journal his great-grandfather had kept and that his grandfather had kept after him, and by walking the South Slope Hollow where 41 woven straw bee skeps still stood in 2 even rows. In the spring of 2024, the way they had stood in 2 even rows since the autumn of 1949. This is the story of why they were still standing. At the back of the meeting room on that May afternoon in 1967, against the rough-plastered wall under a calendar from the Pawnee County Feed and Seed, Orville Stannard stood in his denim bib overalls and his faded chambray work shirt and the gray and red feed store ball cap, and said nothing. He was 39 years old. He had been keeping bees in his father Arvid Stannard's woven rye straw skeps on the south slope of his 180-acre farm on County Road 11 since the spring of 1948, the year he came back from Korea, and his father had been keeping them in those same skeps since 1922, and his grandfather Aldred Stannard had brought the weaving pattern over from a village outside Aarhus, Denmark, in the year 1891. The Skeps were not an opinion. The Skeps were a 60-year inheritance held inside a coil of straw. Garrison Threlkeld finished the talk. He set the frame down on the front desk. He looked across the room at the only man in it who had not picked up one of the Extension's free smokers, and he made the mistake of singling him out by name. "Mr. Stannard," Garrison Threlkeld said, 43 men in this room. 42 of them are going to put a Langstroth on their property this summer. I have been at your skep yard. I have counted 41 straw baskets sitting in 2 rows on your south slope. Those baskets are a museum exhibit, sir, and the Department of Agriculture has stopped subsidizing the wax foundations that fit into them as of January of last year. You will not get a federal cost share on the queen replacements either. Either you put in Langstroths this season, or you will be the last bee man in Pawnee County keeping bees in a basket. Orville Stannard said nothing for the count of 3 slow breaths. He held his gray and red ball cap in his right hand against his thigh. In his left coat pocket was a 1903 black-bound beekeeping journal, closed with a red rubber band that his grandfather had written in Danish in a careful pencil script for the first 8 years, and that his father had switched to English for the next 45, and that he himself had been writing in for the previous 19. The first entry in his grandfather's hand, dated April 1903, said in translation, "A skep is a hive that remembers its bees. A box is a hive that forgets them." He did not quote it. He did not show the book. He looked at the extension agent, and he spoke once in the low, even voice of a man who had thought about a sentence for a long count of months before he said it. "I'll be keeping mine in baskets, Mr. Threlkeld." Garrison Threlkeld laughed once. It was not a cruel laugh. It was the laugh of a man who has just heard a child explain why the sky is blue. "Orville," he said, "there is no future in straw. The future is wood. Wood lets you inspect the brood comb. Wood lets you treat for foul brood. Wood lets you split a hive. Wood lets you ship a queen by mail. Straw lets you do exactly one thing. Straw lets you watch your colonies dwindle for the next 40 years until you have no bees left at all. You are choosing, sir, to be the last man in the county still raising bees the way your grandfather raised them, and your grandfather is buried in the Pawnee Methodist Cemetery 6 miles east of here." The 42 other men in the room did not laugh. They did not look at Orville Stannard either, the Reverend Booker Stillwell, who was 64 years old and the pastor at the Pawnee Methodist Church, and who had stood at the back of the room out of pastoral curiosity, leaned across the row toward Orville Stannard and spoke once in the low voice a pastor uses when he means a thing only one man should hear. "Orville, you are going to stand at this alone." "I have stood at it alone since my father died, Reverend." "Then God's company will have to be enough." "It has been." The Reverend Stillwell looked once at Orville Stannard and looked away. Outside on the gravel turnaround, the engines of 3 or 4 pickups had started early. The talk was over. Orville Stannard put his ball cap back on. He walked out of the extension office. He drove the 4 miles home in a 1956 GMC half-ton pickup with the 1903 journal on the bench seat beside him and the unopened Langstroth pamphlet folded in half on top of it. At the farmhouse on County Road 11, his wife Mavis Stannard was at the kitchen table waiting with a bone china cup of coffee, and she looked at her husband's face, and she did not ask. He told her that night, after supper, on the back porch in the warm May dusk, what Garrison Threlkeld had said. Mavis Stannard, who was 37 years old in 1967 and had grown up on a dairy farm in Saline County and had married Orville in November of 1949, set her coffee cup down on the porch rail. "What did you say back to him, Orville?" "I told him I would keep mine in baskets." "Good." He laughed. "Let him. The bees do not care who laughs. The bees care who feeds them. And your grandfather fed them for 31 years out of those baskets, and your father is feeding them out of those baskets right now. Then we keep them. We keep them the way your grandfather kept them." And he nodded. That summer he wove 4 new skeps, He wove them out of rye straw cut from his own back field in mid-July and bound with strips of blackberry bramble he had cured for 3 weeks in the milk house. Each skep took him 11 hours of work, sitting on a low wooden bench under the elm in the south slope hollow, with his coil needle moving in slow, precise circles. He set the 4 new skeps on flat limestone slabs at the south end of the existing 2 rows, raising the total from 41 to 45. He filled the journal that summer with 31 entries, in pencil, in a careful, slanted hand. The bees took to the new skeps in 7 days. 42 other men in Pawnee County put Langstroth wooden hives on their property that summer. By the autumn of 1967, there were 312 commercial Langstroth boxes in the county. By the autumn of 1969, the count was 408. By 1971, it was 521. Orville Stannard's count on his south slope held at 45. If this story is reaching you tonight, take a moment to press the like button below. It helps the old practices find the men who can still read a 100-year journal. The 1970s came down on Pawnee County the way the 1970s came down on every rural county in Kansas, which is to say slowly and then all at once. Tracheal mites came into the United States in 1984. They came into Pawnee County in the autumn of 1987. Garrison Threlkeld, who was 58 years old by then and senior extension agent for the whole Flint Hills District, drove the county roads through October of 1987 with a clipboard and a Department of Agriculture circular on tracheal mite suppression, and he watched commercial Langstroth yards lose 30% and 40% of their colonies over a single winter. The men with the wooden boxes treated their hives with menthol crystals at $12 an ounce. Some of them recovered, some of them did not. The Langstroth count in the county fell from 521 to 388 between the autumn of 1987 and the spring of 1989. In December of 1987, Garrison Threlkeld drove out to the Stannard farm on County Road 11 with the first slow private doubt of his professional career sitting on the passenger seat beside him. He had stood in 3 commercial bee yards in Pawnee County that week and had counted 117 dead Langstroth colonies. He had told 3 families they would need to take federal disaster loans to replace the queens. He parked the white state sedan at the closed gate and he walked the gravel up to the farmhouse. Orville Stannard was 59 years old by then. He came out onto the porch in the same denim bib overalls and the same chambray shirt and the same gray and red ball cap, and he did not invite the extension agent inside. Garrison Threlkeld asked him on the porch step what his winter losses were that year. Orville Stannard, who had just walked the South Slope Hollow with the 1903 journal in his coat pocket and had counted 43 live colonies of 45, said the count out loud. 2 empty skeps, 43 live. Garrison Threlkeld wrote the numbers on his clipboard. He did not say anything for a long count. The drive back to the white sedan from the porch step was 20 paces, and he stood in the middle of it now without moving. He had built a career on a single sentence from a single textbook published in 1958 in Madison, Wisconsin, and the sentence said that the box was the future and the basket was the past, and the sentence had been wrong in Pawnee County in the autumn of 1987 by a measurable margin of 41 live colonies. Then he turned back to the porch step and he asked the question he had not expected to ask in his life. "Have you treated for tracheal mite, Orville?" Orville Stannard said he had not. "Bees in a straw skep cluster tighter through the winter, Mr. Threlkeld," he said. "The bee bread in the comb of an undisturbed skep runs higher in propolis. The bees seal every interior surface of the woven straw, and the propolis kills the mites in the bees' breathing tubes the way your menthol crystals do, only without the $12 an ounce. My grandfather wrote it on page 41 of a notebook in 1903. He learned it from a man in Aarhus. I would offer to show you the notebook, but I do not believe you would read it." He did not offer to show the journal. Garrison Threlkeld wrote down what he said. He drove back to Larned Bend. He did not put it in any Department of Agriculture circular. He filed the page in a folder in a metal cabinet in his office, and he did not open the folder again for the next 19 years. In the late autumn of 1992, Orville Stannard's father, Arvid Stannard, died in the upstairs bedroom of the farmhouse on County Road 11 at the age of 89, and the Journal of Skep entries passed from a shared book on the kitchen shelf to a book held alone by one man. Orville Stannard, 64 years old by then, and walking the South Slope Hollow at 4:30 every morning with a tin pail of sugar syrup feed and a smoker that he never had to load, sat that winter at the same kitchen table where his father had taught him to weave a skep at the age of 7, and he wrote a single line in pencil on the first blank page after his father's last entry. Arvid Stannard, born March 13, 1903, last entry October 18, 1992, taught me everything the bees did not. He closed the book. He set it back on the shelf. For the next 22 years, he kept the journal the way his father had kept it. He kept the same pencil. He kept the same red rubber band. He wove a new skep every spring, and he let one of the oldest skeps go out of service every autumn, and he never let the total fall below 45. The bees swarmed every May, and he caught the swarms with the same coil mouth box his grandfather had made out of rough cottonwood in 1903, and he hived the swarms into the empty skeps before the comb in the swarm cluster had set hard. By the autumn of 2006, the Langstroth count in Pawnee County had fallen from a 1971 peak of 521 to a working count of 196. The varroa mite had arrived in 1991. The small hive beetle had arrived in 2003, and the cost of commercial chemical treatment for a single 10-frame Langstroth had climbed to between $42 and $58 per box per year. The men with the wooden boxes were tired. 3 of them had quit altogether by 2005. Orville Stannard's count on the South Slope had held at 45 for 19 straight years. In November of 2006, a small delegation of 3 commercial beekeepers from the eastern half of the Flint Hills District drove out to County Road 11 in a Ford Crown Victoria with mud on the rocker panels, and they asked Orville Stannard at the porch step if they could buy a single straw skep from him as a teaching example for the Kansas State University Apiculture Lab. Orville Stannard, who was 78 years old and stooped slightly at the shoulders by then, looked at the 3 of them on his porch step, and he spoke once. "What would you pay me for a skep, gentlemen?" $600 cash today, Mr. Stannard, for a teaching example." And what did your grandfather pay for his beekeeping? Sir, my grandfather paid 68 years of his life to learn to weave one of those baskets, and my father paid 45, and I have paid 58. The skep is not for sale. It is the inheritance. The inheritance does not get sold off in November of any year. The three men nodded. They drove back east. They did not return. In the spring of 2008, a young agricultural reporter from the Wichita Eagle, a woman named Adelaide Pringle, who was 27 years old and 3 years out of journalism school, called the farmhouse on a Sunday evening and asked Orville Stannard for a feature interview. Orville Stannard told her he did not give phone interviews. She wrote a 900-word piece anyway, off the Pawnee County tax records and a photograph she had taken with a long lens from the county road 11 right-of-way. And the piece ran in the spring 2008 issue of a regional farm extension supplement with a headline that Orville Stannard never read. His wife, Mavis Stannard, read it twice and put it in the kitchen drawer beside the 1903 journal, and did not mention it to him for another 6 years. And then 2014 came. In the spring of 2014, the third spring of the United States honeybee colony collapse disorder crisis, the Pawnee County Cooperative Extension Office in Larned Bend conducted its annual May survey of working commercial bee colonies in the county. The survey was conducted by a 31-year-old junior extension agent named Holland Cruz, who had replaced Garrison Threlkeld in the role in 2009, when Garrison retired at the age of 80 to a small ranch house at the edge of town. Holland Cruz drove the gravel roads of Pawnee County for 9 days in the second week of May. He counted live commercial Langstroth colonies on every registered property in the county. The total in May of 1971 had been 521. The total in May of 2006 had been 196. The total in May of 2014 came in at 14. 14 live commercial Langstroth colonies in the entire county. Holland Cruz drove out County Road 11 on the morning of May 14, 2014. He parked the Green Extension Department pickup at the closed gate. He walked the gravel up to the South Slope Hollow alone. Orville Stannard, 86 years old that spring, came down from the porch with the journal in his coat pocket, and he walked the young agent through the 2 even rows of woven rye straw skeps that had been standing in that hollow since the autumn of 1949. There were 45 of them. Holland Cruz counted them twice. He listened at the mouth of each one. Then he sat down on the low wooden weaving bench under the elm, and he looked up at the old man, and he asked the question he had walked 400 yards down a gravel drive to ask. "How many live colonies, Mr. Stannard?" Orville Stannard looked at him in the warm May morning light. He held the journal flat against the side of his leg. He spoke once. 44. I lost one in February." Holland Cruz wrote the number on his clipboard. He sat for a long count under the elm. Then he wrote a second number underneath it. 14. Then he drew a careful pencil line under both numbers, and he added them. 58. The total live count for Pawnee County, May of 2014. He looked up. "Mr. Stannard, 44 out of 58 live colonies in this county are sitting in 2 rows in this hollow on your property." Orville Stannard looked at the 2 even rows of woven straw skeps. The bees were working the white clover on the lower slope. The sound of the 44 live colonies was a low, even drone that filled the hollow the way water fills a kettle. The old man did not say anything for a long count. He did not look proud. He looked at the Skeps the way a man looks at a thing his grandfather has handed him. Then he said one sentence, in the low, even voice of a man who had been waiting 47 years to say it without saying it loud. The straw remembered, Mr. Cruz. The wood did not. Holland Cruz nodded once. He did not write the sentence on his clipboard. He understood it was not for the clipboard. That afternoon, Holland Cruz drove the green pickup back into Larned Bend, and he stopped at the small ranch house at the edge of town where Garrison Threlkeld, 85 years old by then and white-haired and stooped at the shoulders himself, was sitting on the front porch in a faded canvas barn coat over a high-collared chambray shirt buttoned to the throat, with ankle-length dark trousers and brown Oxford shoes scuffed at the toe. Holland Cruz told him the count. 44 of 58. South Slope, County Road 11. Garrison Threlkeld did not say anything for a long count either. Then he asked, in the quiet voice of a man who has finally read a folder he had filed 47 years before, whether Holland Cruz would mind driving him out to County Road 11 the following morning. Holland Cruz drove him out the next morning. They parked at the closed gate. Garrison Threlkeld walked the gravel up to the porch slowly. He held his hat in both hands. The combed, sandy blonde hair of 47 years before was white now and thin under the brim. Orville Stannard came out onto the porch in the same denim bib overalls and the same chambray work shirt and the same gray and red ball cap, and he stood at the rail and waited. Garrison Threlkeld looked the old man in the face for the first time in 47 years. He held his hat against his stomach. He said the only thing a man in that position can say. I had it wrong, Orville. I called your Skeps a museum exhibit in May of 1967, and in May of 2014, your Skeps are the only working honeybee colonies left in this county. I should have read your grandfather's journal in 1987 when I asked you on this porch step what your winter loss was. I did not read it then. I should have. Orville Stannard looked at him a long count. He did not invite him inside. He did not say anything in return for the count of 3 slow breaths. Then he reached into his coat pocket. He took out the 1903 black-bound beekeeping journal closed with the red rubber band. He held it out to Garrison Threlkeld. He spoke once. Take it back to your office, Garrison. Read it, then bring it back. You can have it for 1 week. Garrison Threlkeld took the journal in both hands the way a man takes a thing he does not believe he is being handed. The journal weighed 9.5 ounces. He had stood in this hollow once in the summer of 1968 and had counted the 45 Skeps from a distance through the windscreen of the state sedan, and had driven away, and had not stood in the hollow again for 46 straight years. He nodded once. He walked back down the gravel with the journal pressed against his coat. He read the 1903 journal cover to cover that night at the kitchen table of his small ranch house in Larned Bend under a single brass desk lamp while his late wife's bone china cup sat untouched at his elbow. He read it again the next morning. He read the entry on page 41 about propolis in a sealed skep. He read his own handwritten margin note from December of 1987 that Orville Stannard had quoted to him on the porch step that day. He had not put that quote in any Department of Agriculture circular in 1987 because He had not believed it. He sat at the kitchen table at sunrise in May of 2014, and he understood that he had been wrong for 47 straight years, and that the cost of being wrong had been measured first in straw against wood and then in dollars per treatment, and finally in the death of 507 of 521 commercial colonies in a single county in the state of Kansas. He brought the journal back 6 days later. He did not say anything else when he handed it over. He did not need to. Orville Stannard died in the upstairs bedroom of the farmhouse on County Road 11 on the morning of October 3rd, 2024, at the age of 96, in the bed his father had died in and his grandfather had died in. The funeral was on the 7th. The 1903 journal was on the night table beside him. The 45 Skeps in the South Slope Hollow had 43 live colonies that October. His grandson Tucker Stannard, 29 years old in 2024, took the deed and the keys and the journal that autumn. Tucker had grown up in Wichita. He had come back to the farm for 2 weeks every July as a boy. He did not know how to weave a skep. He did not know how to catch a swarm. He did not know what propolis was. He knew only that his grandfather had stood at the back of a meeting room in May of 1967 and had been called a museum exhibit by a man with a clipboard and had been the only man in the county with live bees 47 years later. Mavis Stannard, his grandmother, 94 years old that autumn and still living in the farmhouse, sat with him at the kitchen table on the night of the funeral with a bone china cup of coffee between them and the 1903 journal open on the oilcloth. She turned to the back page and she pointed at a pencil note Orville Stannard had written in his slanted, careful hand in May of 2014, the day Garrison Threlkeld had stood on the porch with his hat in his hands. The note said only, 44 of 58 in Pawnee County. The straw remembered. Your grandfather wrote that the night Garrison Threlkeld brought the journal back, Mavis said. She closed the cover gently with one age-spotted hand. He waited 47 years to write 4 sentences in this book, Tucker. He never read the Wichita paper. He never read the bulletin from the university. He did not need them. He had a man on his porch with a hat in both hands. Did he forgive him, Grandma? He handed him the book. That was the forgiveness? That was the only forgiveness a man like your grandfather ever gave. Tucker Stannard read it twice. He closed the journal. He put it in his coat pocket. If you have ever stood at a fence line watching an old man's bees work the clover, subscribe to the old man's field. Some inheritances do not arrive in a will. They arrive in a coil of straw bound with blackberry bramble. He walked the South Slope Hollow that next morning at first light with his grandmother's coffee in a tin cup. The 45 Skeps stood in 2 even rows on the flat limestone slabs. The bees were working the goldenrod at the bottom of the slope. The drone of the 43 live colonies filled the hollow the way it had filled the hollow for 75 autumns. Tucker Stannard sat on the low wooden weaving bench under the elm. He opened the 1903 journal. He read the first entry his great-grandfather Aldred Stannard had written in Danish in April of 1903. He read the English translation his great-grandfather had written underneath it in 1922, when his grandfather Arvid had been 10 years old. A skep is a hive that remembers its bees. A box is a hive that forgets them. He read the last entry his grandfather Orville Stannard had written in pencil in September of 2024. Tucker will keep the count. The count holds. That spring, he wove his first skep. It took him 14 hours under the elm. The rye straw came off the back field in mid-July. The blackberry bramble he cured for 3 weeks in the milk house. The coil needle was the same coil needle his great-grandfather had cut out of a cottonwood limb in 1902. He set the new skep on a flat limestone slab at the south end of the row. The total held at 45. The bees took to it in 9 days. The 1903 journal is on the kitchen shelf in the farmhouse on County Road 11 in Pawnee County, Kansas. The straw skeps are in 2 even rows in the South Slope hollow under the elm. The bees are working the goldenrod at the bottom of the slope. The grandson is on the bench in the half-dark before sunrise with a tin cup of coffee and a pencil in his hand. The count holds. Some knowledge doesn't get louder when the world doubts it. It just waits.